What's up, everybody? This is goodness gracious. So hopefully this is gonna be a fun one. It's a question. I'm answering a question that I had like every Halloween ever since I've had kids, and I'm basically answering what movies or what's a good list of movies that are horror films. Goodness, that are at least like horror films for kids, or but not they don't not quite horror, but like spooky themed or scary movies essentially that young kids can watch, like not just like 13, but like 5 years old, to introduce people into kind of the scary movie world without actually scaring them or giving them kind of a few thrills, but not actually, going off the wall. And as you go back in time, you realize this standard has changed over the years. Whenever I was a kid, there was a lot of movies that people that were PG, or even like designed for kids that were quite terrifying. That nowadays, that even movies that are actually meant to be horror films are actually less terrifying than films that were designed for kids in the past. It's like our kind of like our standards for what is acceptable have changed, and I kind of made a list that's sort of in between, like what's I'll just go. If this sounds interesting at all, I apologize for my cat, but I'll just jump right into the list and I'll explain things as I go. So this is 25 plus Halloween horror movies for kids or preteens, spooky movies. So the first one, now these aren't necessarily in order, like best to worst, but this is my list that I've been coming up with. And I think one of my favorites, this one I put at the top, is called Ernest Scared Stupid. For those that have seen it, I'm sure it's already on your list. For those who have not, this is a kids movie that actually has some. It's a hilarious film that's great for everybody. It's I actually forget the star. There was multiple Ernest movies, but this was probably the only one that was actually truly really good. And it's kind of a rewatch every year. It's a classic of the spooky kids movies. It's about basically trolls that take over a small town, and kids using milk to take over, and it's truly like an adventure fun film that actually also is has some true skill. I think that's like the perfect example of something that's like introducing you to actually something scary that's not gonna totally leave them nightmares forever. The second one I have is Coraline. Now, Coraline is in kind of the same boat, where for someone that's super young, it has real scares to it, but at the same time, it's a cartoon. It's I say a cartoon. Is that the same thing as animated in general, or is cartoon only 2D? It's three dimensional. It's I think it's produced by Tim Burton. I'm not exactly sure who the director is. It's based off of a Neil Gaiman book, um, I believe so. And anyway, it's about like a young girl that kind of ends up in like an alternative reality through a portal that leads to a witch that's pretending to be her parents. It's another just kind of classic spooky, and it actually is scary, but it's not like gonna leave nightmares. But it has some dark points and themes. Third one I would say that's fun is it's Goosebumps, but the new Jack Black, the first one. You could probably add Goosebumps 2 in there too, but specifically the first one is actually I feel does pretty good justice to the Goosebumps franchise. For those that is unaware of what Goosebumps is, or at least the book series by R.L. Stine, you can go and look that up on your own. Or I don't know if you've been living under a rock forever, but the Jack Black kind of where Jack Black plays R.L. Stine, I feel is it's another. It's like a fun movie that it does introduce you to horror elements. It's not like truly scary. Um, and I'm not going to go dwell on it too much further than that. The fourth one I have is Jumanji, the original with Robin Williams. This is, although not quite in the same realm of like scary, it's probably more of an adventure. It is like, especially the whole initial concept of the beating drum. I remember as like a kid, this was kind of an always go to during Halloween. Was the Jumanji is it's first of all just an amazing movie, and then when you add in kind of the thriller horror aspects of it, it's kind of like a true great family thrill movie. Number five, I have Labyrinth with Whoa, my goodness, with David Bowie. Um, so this is more of like a fantasy than scary, but it's definitely a spooky movie. Another one that involves trolls, especially like the opening or like the beginning where it's like before she goes into kind of the fantasy world. It's definitely got some spooky themes of like monsters and things like that, and possible monsters in your closet and under your bed and kind of those classic concepts. But it's another just like great movie. I mean, it's like one of those few ones that I was like really shocked when my like kid was really into it at a young age. The sixth one I have is The House with the Clock in Its Walls, which I believe is directed by Eli Roth, who is like the same guy who did Hostel and uh, true horror films from kind of my teen years. And but this is, I believe it's based off of probably sort of like a classic book in the horror world. I think it like came out at a time. I think the movie came out in like maybe the mid 2000s, um, or like between 2010 and 2020. I'm not sure, somewhere in that decade, but it's actually quite good, and it's kind of on the same lines of the Jack Black Goosebumps movie. Number seven is a classic. I don't hear much about this movie, but as a kid, I remember thinking this was like one of the funniest, fun horror comedies and it's the Don Knotts movie called The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. It's like a classic haunted house story of like a guy. I think he's like challenged to stay overnight in like a haunted house, and it's got all the classic things of like an invisible ghost playing a piano and eyes moving on paintings and a kind of all the cliche or um, tropes of like a haunted house horror movie, but intermixed with kind of classic, kind of goofy comedy, and it's just a classic, great. Uh, I wouldn't even call it a horror comedy. It's like just a horror themed comedy film. Once again, that's called The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. So the next one I have is Hotel Transylvania, the whole franchise. If you don't know anything about these are kind of just like classic. It's got all your monsters from Dracula to Wolfman and all that, and it's an animated series, and they mainly focus on the Dracula character in Transylvania, and he has a hotel that he has just for monsters, and it's just generally kind of a fun, spooky themed, definitely a kids oriented movie with almost zero horror elements at all, but it's just fun. It doesn't have any real scares or thrills, is what I mean. So it wouldn't have any real like horror elements, but it's fun and it's in the spooky theme, Halloween theme genre. Number nine is the classic, at least for my generation, The Nightmare Before Christmas. Once again, no like true scares like whoa, like kind of jump scares or anything like that. But it's definitely got some dark themes. It's fun. I feel like it's pretty much safe for most kids or all kids, as long as they aren't super freaked out by bugs or something, because there are kind of some weird elements like that. If you want to go super easy, kind of, that is definitely a kids film, but kind of the whole family friendly. The 10th one I have is The Haunted Mansion with Eddie Murphy. Although it like especially the time whenever I first saw it and it came out, I was like, man, it's like based off of the Disney ride, The Haunted Mansion, but very loosely. It's just got like elements from the ride, like the hitchhiking ghosts and kind of the songs from it, and but it's kind of a weird plot, but it's still fun, and it's actually still a pretty decent movie. Everything you'd want out of it, it has. It's not the greatest, but think it's still deserving of the list and worth a watch if you haven't seen it. The number 11 is definitely one of those at the top of the list that actually does have some real scares and horror elements. It's Ghostbusters. Goodness, sorry, my cat's been wild this time, but yeah, Ghostbusters. I'm talking about the original with the, Harold Ramis and the so I believe it came out in the 1980s, and this one does have some parts that could be scary for kids, like some true kind of real jump. I guess you call them like jump scares or just like kind of scary elements, but it's a mostly fun comedy that I feel is pretty much good for all as long as they're above the age of like 8 or something like that, or maybe depending on what your kids are into. Like mine, she's already into Stranger Things, and I won't even say her age, but anyway, so that's Ghostbusters. Number 12 is Monster House. Monster House, I think that's a Spielberg produced one. It's another just like classic. Once again, not like scary, but definitely got some scary themes. It's about a house that basically eats kids, or that's what they believe, and you delve into why that is. It's an animated film. Number 13 is The Witches, and I'm talking about the original one. I have not seen the newest one with Anne Hathaway. I'm talking about the old Roald. It's based off Roald Dahl, the same guy who wrote James and the Giant Peach and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and kind of all those classics. Going Solo, I think, was one of his about like his like real life in his 20s or something like. Anyway, Roald Dahl's The Witches. This one is like where the kid gets turned into a mouse by witches, and it's insane. And the witches are legit scary. So once again, like if your kids are really young, it's got some scary. Whenever the witches actually turn into witches, it's frightening, but it's meant for kids. It's fun. It's definitely worth it on the list. The 14, in a similar sense, is like actually has some scary parts, but it might go over the line because this is where I'm talking about at the beginning, where like as you went back in time, it was like, dang, they allowed a lot more. Like even though it's like it targeted to kids, it was like it truly is like scary at times. And this one's called Little Monsters with Fred Savage and Howie Mandel. If you haven't seen it, like it's definitely worth going into. I think it came out in the 90s or maybe even earlier. Um, but it's like another one of those where it's like it has true monsters and true dark themes and like true scary elements that are involved. Not quite like jump scare status, but the monsters look scary. It's about monsters and like a kid, and like some of the monsters are good and some are bad, and but it's fun. It's definitely worth a watch. Uh, and then number 15, I have like the whole Adams Family. Adams Family Values, the ones with Christina Ricci, and nowadays like Wednesday is probably a bit more like teen focused, but so of course that is a great series that's out now. But I'm talking about like the original ones of like the Adams Family, and even the animated ones. Uh, they're all fun, all worth it. For those that don't know that, it's like look into it. The Adams Family is definitely spooky themed. It doesn't have like true like scare elements, but it's right up there for a Halloween do. Sorry, that goes into the next one called Scooby Doo 1 and 2. Those were fun, not good movies, but they're fun. They do what you want to do for something that's like family friendly, kids version of spooky themed, and they try to like introduce like what would be like scares or without it actually being scary really at all. Um, and those are live action, except for the fact that Scooby Doo is obviously like 3D animated. Um, Number 17 is the Hocus Pocus. And just recently, they came out with Hocus Pocus 2, which I think was a worthy, good sequel. I think the reviews I got, kind of a lot of people were agreeing. Like it definitely was. They're fun films, but once again, these ones actually have some like scary elements. Like the witches are really turning kid. I think even in the first one, like they truly do like suck a child's soul or something like that. It has some dark elements, but overall, like it's not a scary film. either one of them, but they have dark themes. If you're watching this movie, or watching my video about what are like horror films for kids, this is probably going to be right up your category, and you probably already have it on your list if you haven't already seen it. But anyway, number 18, this is crossing that line of like this wasn't necessarily meant for kids, but I feel it's worthy of the list, and that's Beetlejuice. I feel like I watched this as a kid. Feel it's a good enough for kids to watch, but seeing as unlike a lot of the other films on this, it's not meant specifically for kids. It's more of like a, probably like a PG, maybe maybe PG-11 kind of movie or something like that, to where there's like dark themes. It deals with death. It's about ghosts. There are scary things. There are scary elements, but it's never like truly terrifying. There's no jump scares, and it's overall a fun comedy. And the next film on this list is in the exact same category. I think it's called The Burbs with Tom Hanks, and it seems like that is a fairly like not as talked about as as it deserves. I think The Burbs is one of the funnest, funniest, family friendly kind of horror themed comedies out there. And that one's like about where like the neighbors are. They believe the neighbors next door are Satanists and killing people. And as dark as that is, like, and there are parts. I think there's even parts in the movie where he's watching other horror films, and I remember those scaring me as a kid because those are scenes from real horror films. But it's not like overwhelming. It's not like gonna totally just like blow your kids' minds. But I think it's worthy of a list. Like I was saying, it's probably like a PG-11 kind of movie. Number 20 that I have on the list is called The Boy Who Cried Werewolf. This might be a TV movie, but I remember thinking it was a really fun, kind of aimed at kids, kind of horror themed, family friendly movie about like kids that find out they're werewolves. Just one of those classic kind of stories. Um, just to kind of wrap up, these other ones are films that I haven't seen, but they seem interesting. They're like kind of more modern movies that are on that you can find on streaming services. I can't remember which ones, but the names of the first one is called The Curse of Bridge Hollow with Marlon Wayans. That looked interesting. The second one I have is The Babysitter's Guide to Monster Hunting, which looked really interesting. And the third one was called Night Books, which looked really interesting. Like I said, I haven't seen them, but they seem like they would probably be worth a watch, even if they aren't necessarily good. Um, Now, these last ones I'm going to mention are arguable. They're definitely like kids probably can't handle, but uh, I watched them as a kid. Definitely like watched them like probably at 10 uh, or even younger, and I remember loving them. And they probably are why I'm into horror to this day. They probably were probably too much for me to watch as a kid, but just gonna say them anyway. And the first one's Gremlins. It seemed like a classic. That's like I remember even reading the script whenever I was like 13, because I could get it. That was like when I first started getting into writing, and like that was like one I was like I have to get my hands on it, and being like mind blown that the original script was a true horror film not meant for kids at all, and it's like a lot darker than the movie that we see today. Anyway, next one was Poltergeist. That is a true horror film. It's a Spielberg, but at the time that was like whenever like they made horror films for the family, and like um, you don't see many movies like that today, where it's like a full blown horror film, but they intend it to be watched by a whole family together. I feel like that's what Poltergeist was, and that's how my family watched. I watched that movie like with my family, and I was young at the time, and it stars young kids, and the whole plot is about like a girl that goes missing through a portal to like a ghost realm, and the parents try to get her back, and there's ghosts that are true horrifying. People's faces like melt off, and uh, real monsters and things like that. Trees come alive, and but it's still a fun movie that I feel is like somewhat arguable, worth the list. The third one is called The Monster Squad. That's another one that's like I feel again it's like a family. Back in the day, like the '80s or whatever, they made movies that were like basically horror films, but meant for the whole family, or at least for like, you know, 11 and up. And that was I considered the Monster Squad right in there, where it's like a bunch of young preteen boys that are trying to literally take on monsters that are trying to take over their town. And these are like the classic monsters, the creature from Black Lagoon, Dracula, werewolves, and things like that. Um, the next one I have is the Little Shop of Horrors, which this is like, I swear, even today you'll watch these, like that is like a musical that you can go to, they'll put on at your high schools for the whole family, but the entire concept of it is a um, you know feeding people to a plant. It's fun though, and it's like, how they get away with this? I don't know. And then the final one I have is Tremors, and that's a once again it's like a comedy horror that is like a true horror with real like blood and scares, but it's like it's not so over the top. It's not like people coming in and possessing anybody. It's just like a fun creature feature about things underground that are in a, like, I don't even remember where they're at, like Arizona or something, and these creatures that live underground and they're eating people, and but it's not like gory to any kind of extremes, like that. But it's just like fun, and I remember as a kid just loving it. Um, uh, and but that's my list. I hope that's helpful, and as you know we go along, I'll add or adjust the list, and maybe make one each year, adding to the whole all of them. So if that was helpful, or if interesting to anybody, like and subscribe. Sorry about my cat, and anyway, catch you later.